Welcome back. Thank you for joining us here on Wooden Sticks from the Aquarius Home Services Studio. Big show on tap today. Michael Russo from The Athletic. Any hockey fan here in this area, in the Twin Cities, knows all about his great work. In my opinion, the best beat writer in the National Hockey League, and it's really not close. And no disrespect to any others out there. This guy covers it top to bottom, and we're going to pick his brain. We're going to go back to the Florida Panthers winning the Stanley Cup. Michael, of course, got his start in Florida way back in the 90s with that organization covering the Panthers, and so it had to be a little bit bittersweet because I know he, like a lot of us that cover the Wild, are hoping we can have that kind of fun in St. Paul. So we'll get a little taste of what that run was like for him with the Panthers. We'll talk about Dean Evison, our good friend and former coach of the Wild, finally getting a job. I think it took longer than a lot of us expected, but he'll be the bench boss in Columbus. Of course, the big news of the week for Minnesota fans is Brock Faber and his 8-year extension for $68 million. I'd love to hear Mike's take on that. And then we'll just get into the big talkers for the Minnesota Wild. And we're about a month away from training camp getting going. Preseason games right around the corner. I was looking at that schedule. That starts mid to late September. And so we'll take a look at some of the most pressing needs this team has, what Mike expects from players that were either hurt last year or had subpar seasons. We're going to talk about the goaltending situation because I think that's ever in motion, with Gustafsson now leaving the door open just a crack here for Jesper Wallstedt and the way he played down the stretch last year, getting his first couple wins as a National Hockey League goaltender. We'll talk about Marc-Andre Fleury and how many games, Russo thinks he can play. And then I want to pick his brain on a couple of really big ones. And the biggest being Kirill Kaprizov. To me, covering this team, the games take on a different feel when 97 is in the lineup. And there's been stretches where he's been hurt and he's played through injury. But when he's not in the lineup, this is such a different team to watch. And I'm not saying that in the situations where he's hurt, they can't win. I'm just saying from a fan's perspective, if you love the game, it's just not as nearly as enjoyable when Kaprizov isn't in the lineup. And we're getting to the point now where Wild fans, rightfully so, are nervous about and anxiously awaiting the chance for Bill Guerin to extend and make him a part of this organization long term. And I think if it gets to be this time next year, if we're into August and we're on the cusp of it right now of 2025 and there's nothing there, then I think we're going to get to the stage of anxiety turns to panic. I know all about both. My good friends that I work with every winter covering this team can acknowledge that. LaPanta's referenced this before, but honestly, it's a big talker and it's a big question mark moving forward. And I think it's exciting though that the Wild have got some young talent in position to make an impact. And the Brock Faber deal has a positive impact on Kirill Kaprizov. Matt Boldy, off back-to-back seasons where he's been able to score 30-plus and played well at the World Championships, looking like a guy that can be the 1A to Kirill Kaprizov. That makes an impact. Having young goaltending talent. Gustafsson proved that not last year, but the year before. Wallstedt, being a first-round draft pick, looks like he could be a mainstay at that position for a long time. And then you look at some of the younger players in this organization. I think the next big one to make an impact on a roster in the near future would be a guy like Liam Ogren, but there's a ton of talent. And going back to the draft and Zeev Boyum and how well that went. Kirill Kaprizov is a guy that's plugged into all of that. And I can't wait to hear. I'm fascinated to hear what Michael Russo thinks about all of these moves marinating in the mind of our superstar to make sure that the Wild are able to get him locked up and he can be a part of this organization for his entire career. That's what we all want. That's what we all need. And I think if Minnesota in the next 3 to 7 years is going to win a Stanley Cup, I firmly believe the guy that skates over, sees Gary Bettman and grabs that cup is Kirill Kaprizov. I firmly believe it. Superstars have a way of landing that Stanley Cup. Ryan Carter made that point on our broadcast last winter. The cup tends to migrate to superstars, and he is that guy. So let's lock him up and keep him here long term. We're going to talk a ton of Minnesota Wild today. Yeah, it's Wooden Sticks. So we'll tap into the Florida Panthers and where Mike got his start. We'll touch on Darby Hendrickson and Andrew Burnett now having one of the cup favorites in Nashville. But really, We're going to break it down when it comes to your favorite team here locally, the Minnesota Wild. That's today on Wooden Sticks. Before we get there, we got to throw some love the way of my good friend John Schweitz, and he's a big part of the Freemasons in town here and does a ton of great, and I mean great, financial work for charities in our community. This is when people hear the word Freemasons, they always think of the secret handshakes and the goofy hats and all those pancake breakfasts, and that's all a part of it. But Masonic Charities would prefer that you think about all the work they do behind the scenes in our community. The Masonic Cancer Center at the U of M, Masonic Children's Hospital, and of course the Masonic Home in Bloomington. There's just a few examples of the great things that Freemasons do and support here in Minnesota. They're the largest fraternal organization in the world, and Masons have consistently answered that call when it comes to charitable needs. I'm so thankful for John Schweitz and the Freemasons and the Minnesota Masonic Charities for being a part of our show here on Wooden Sticks. Now, what we need are a few more of you to get involved, and there's one way to do it, and there's one person to contact. If you've listened to our show, you know it's Karen Cleary, kcleary@talknorth.com. We'd love to have a few more sponsors here to keep this thing churning into the hockey season, which is right around the corner, and we're going to tee it up today with one of the best from the Athletic. Michael Russo joins the show next. We're back on Wooden Sticks from the Aquarius Home Services Studio. My name is Kevin Gorg, the host of the program. So happy to be joined by my good buddy, my travel partner every winter, Michael Russo from The Athletic. Mikey, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I'm excited to be with you. It's been a long time since I've seen you, and I appreciate you filling in for me in June.
Yeah, I had a great time. That was during the Stanley Cup, and we had a pretty nice crowd there at Tuttle's. You're going to be back there on the 14th, it sounds like?
Yeah, Split Rocks, actually, which is up in Wyoming. So, yeah, anybody that wants to come on out, it'll be fun. LaPanta and myself.
So, first of all, how was Portugal with LaPanta? I think your mom might have been there, and I'm pretty sure Margot joined the trip as well.
Yeah, it was my sixth or seventh trip, and my mom's come on every one of them. And Margot, well, it would be their fifth or sixth, whatever one less would be. My first one I did solo. That was Scotland and England back in the day, and then Scotland and Ireland, and then LaPanta's been on every one since. But it's fun, 10 days with LaPanta gets a little bit old, I probably for both of us, I would think. But he's a good partner to do these trips with.
And the weather looks spectacular.
Oh my God, we got really lucky because apparently it's usually like 90, 95 degrees this time of year in Portugal, and we were talking like 70 to 75 every day. I don't even know if we saw a raindrop other than one morning that we did a river cruise. So it was a great trip. My first time in Portugal, and that was really fun because pretty much every trip that I've done with Defined Destinations, I've been to most of the countries before. Not necessarily the cities. Like we did Innsbruck and Salzburg once. That was my there, Vienna. But I had never been to Portugal, and it was. I would 100% go back.
Yeah, it looked spectacular, and I know leading up to the trip, I had a chance to dine at the LaPanta's house, and they were getting all revved up, trying different Portuguese wines to prepare for the endeavor, and it looked like it went off without a hitch. And the reason I got to fill in for you on Worst Seats in the House is you were covering the Stanley Cup, and it ended up being a fantastic 7-game series. Yeah. It started out like a clunker, but for you, covering the Panthers again, where it all started, what was that experience like to see them win their very first one?
Well, it was exciting, especially being on the ice when they won the cup. That's the cool part of the NHL is the reporters go on the ice after the celebration with the cup, and so not just seeing the current players that I got to know over a 2-month stretch where I covered the Panthers, but seeing guys like Kyle Okposo lift it, but then some of the people that I covered back in the day that are still with the organization: Roberto Luongo, Ed Jovanovski, Bill Lindsay, Randy Moeller. It really, at one point, Ed Jovanovski gave me a hug, and he's like, "You were part of this at the beginning," and it kind of like brought home the fact that I did cover them right from the outset, and so it was they're a fabulous hockey team, great management, and obviously a fantastic coach in Paul Maurice, but to see Sasha Barkov become the player that he has, and then the clutchness from guys like Reinhart and Verhaeghe and Gus Forsling really, becoming a name that I think a lot of hockey fans will be talking about for years to come. He's Jonas Brodin, basically. It was really special. And then to be in that building, and remember the fact that there was a passionate fan base there. And unfortunately, from 1996 to 2022, when Andrew Burnett won the President's Trophy there, and they won a playoff round. They had not won a playoff round in that stretch. So 26 straight years, Gorgie, of not winning a playoff round, and you're going to lose fans. And, it became fashionable in the NHL for fans to make fun of other hockey fans, to make fun of that fan base and that organization and think they should relocate. But I knew there was a fan base there, and they just had to provide some winning. And they've done that the last 3 years, and it's going to continue for a long time to come.
Yeah, they look like a team that's going to be a force for a while. On the flip side, is this the arrival of the Edmonton Oilers? Because we've heard for a couple of years now that this was a team that was ready to contend. They got off to that horrific start last year. And I'm not saying we're all looking forward to this because, we live in the Western Conference with the Minnesota Wild, but it sure looks like a team that at the core is going to be a cup contender for the next few years.
Yeah, and I think they made some good moves this offseason as well. They've got obviously a new GM in Stan Bowman with Kenny Holland leaving in a real bizarre, circumstance where it just felt like the ownership and Kenny Holland just did not get along, and he guides them manages them to a Stanley Cup final, a 7-game series, and then leaves right afterwards. And he's just a brilliant GM. Is this the arrival? I think so. The one thing though is that Leon Draisaitl's only got 1 year left on his contract, and so it's going to be really interesting how Stan Bowman navigates this. This is somebody that obviously figured out a way to keep Taves and Kane there for a long time with big contracts. Can he do the same with Draisaitl? Would the fact that he gets along so well with McDavid and the fact that they showed last year that they could get to at least that 7th game, would that keep Leon Draisaitl there to re-sign? I think that's a big thing to know if this is sort of the arrival that's going to continue. But I thought they played a great series. Obviously got off to a tough start. McDavid was unbelievable, especially in their victories. And they proved, other than what Anthony LaPanta thinks, Gorgie, that you could actually win with McDavid and Draisaitl. LaPanta doesn't think he can. Obviously, getting to a Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final shows to me that they could get to the promised land if they really want to.
And you look at the landscape now of the Western Conference, and we've still got one more year where we can talk about the buyout for Ryan Suter and Zach Parise, and the fact that the Wild are playing a little shorthanded financially. I look at 6 teams right now in the West, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but they appear to be. It's hard to say lock to make the playoffs in the NHL because injuries can happen and strange things year by year, once in a while pop up. But I look at Edmonton, I look at Vancouver, I look at Vegas, I look at Nashville, I look at Dallas, and I look at Colorado. I look at those 6 teams, 3 on each side, Mike, and I don't see a way those teams don't make it back at least into the playoffs, which leaves us with a bunch of teams for 2 spots.
Yeah, absolutely. Vegas is the one I'll be interested to see if they start taking a step back. Their cap hell is starting to really catch up to them, and they've had to make some tough decisions in the last couple of years. And I still don't exactly love some of the moves they made and committing to Thomas Hertl forever. And it's just going to be really fascinating how they handle the next couple of years. But, Nashville's on the rise. Winnipeg might take a step back this year. I don't think they had a great offseason. But, look, there's the thing that the Wild have to worry about, as good as their prospect pool is that eventually these teams that have really struggled the last couple of years, that were fortunate enough because of that to get top draft picks, are going to start to throw these guys in the lineup, and they are going to get good. I mean, San Jose is one of them. I don't think they're there yet, but they've got a ton of kids coming. Anaheim's one of them. They've got a ton of kids coming. The one thing about Arizona being such a, essentially not only just a doormat the last several years, but a team that was willing to just not spend, is that they have just had tons and tons of draft picks there that they've been able to use for various reasons. And I think now that they're in Utah, they're going to just be on the rise. And we both know last year Utah, or Arizona in that case, was a real tough team for the Wild to play, and that was when they didn't have a lot of these guys that were ready to sort of become forefront figures there. So the Wild, I still like them. I still think if they're healthy that they should be a playoff team. But at some point here, they are going to have to show that it wasn't just injuries last year that brought them down. They obviously had goaltending issues last year. They had penalty kill issues last year, and but they've really just kind of rolled it back every year, every year, every year by signing the Middletons, the Hartmans, the Folinos to 4 or 5 year deals, 3, 4, 5 year deals. A lot of these guys, Goudreau obviously, and so these guys are only getting older, and at some point you're going to have to start integrating a lot of these young kids that we've heard about for so long, and so eventually I'm going to want to see Urov in the lineup and Riley Heidt in the lineup and Hunter Haight in the lineup and some of these defensemen that we've heard about, and so. They had a really great draft this year. They've got a lot of kids coming, but at some point here, they are going to have to give these guys the opportunity to play to see if now Minnesota is going to be able to keep on par with a lot of these sort of lesser lights of the last couple of years that are going to be on the rise in the next 2 or 3 seasons, because this conference is going to become really, really tough.
Yeah, it looks that way. And I guess specifically our dear friends, now Darby Hendrickson and Andrew Burnett in charge in Nashville. I had the chance to stop by Diamond Joe Casino in Iowa last week, and I see that they're 14-1. They're one of the top 6 betting choices to win the Stanley Cup. They've added Stamkos and Marcia Show. They had a good run last year. Do you look at Nashville as a legitimate threat to make a cup run right now?
I really do. I mean, first of all, they got an incredible defenseman in Roman Yossi. He's going to get outstanding support from Brady Shea right now. I am a huge Brady Shea fan, and I know you are as well, especially being from next door, to Lakeville. And then obviously you add a couple of Stanley Cup champions in Jonathan Marchessault and Steven Stamkos, but then you got the goalie there. You got Forsberg, who had a brilliant season. I do think that they, as long as they've really helped. The one area that last year Vancouver was able to take advantage of them somehow was goaltending. They just sort of got out goaltended late in that series against Vancouver last year. And the depth of Vancouver, I think, eventually really hurt Nashville. I think Nashville improved their depth this year, and I just think that they are a really quality team. The other team that I'm really bullish on right now in the Eastern Conference is New Jersey. They got the new coach. They got now a goalie. And it just feels like with Dougie Hamilton back in the lineup that team is going to become the contender that a lot of us thought that they were going to be last year. But they never were able to fix their goaltending issues last year. And then Dougie Hamilton's injury just killed them. And so New Jersey in the East, Nashville in the West are 2 teams that I see significantly on the rise this year.
It's funny you bring up New Jersey because they opened up betting odds for the Stanley Cup right after Florida won this year's edition. And the Devils were like, at some spots 18-1 and some spots 20-1, and the Sharps have bet that down now to some spots 10-1, other spots as high as 11-1. So they're like the third betting choice right now to win the cup. So that's an interesting take you have there. The other big change in the East, we finally got to figure out where Dean Evison was going to coach next. I don't know why it took so long. I don't know why other teams passed up on him. I think he's a tremendous coach. We know now he's going to Columbus, and that might have a unique tie into some offseason steam you have with the Minnesota Wild, maybe making some moves with Columbus.
Yeah, Dean Evison or not, the Wild have been talking to the Columbus Blue Jackets for a while. Now, I think the Wild at first, after Jarmo Kekalainen got fired, they really slow played it, but they always knew that eventually when a new GM got in there, that they were going to go and have some trade conversations on myriad fronts. One is at one point the Wild were very interested in sending Marco Rossi there for sort of a like move for one of their young kids, whether it was a Cole Sillinger, whether it was a Karel Marchenko, whether it was a Kent Johnson, somebody like that. But now I really think that there's another guy that they Wild really like is David Juracek, a defenseman there. Obviously, I don't think the Wild have a need for a young defenseman right now, especially after getting Zeev Bouillon and just re-signing Brock Faber to the 8-year contract extension. But I'm telling you, Patrick Laine is somebody the Wild, if they could somehow make the money work, would take a flyer on. The problem is I don't even see how it's conceivable for the Wild to make it work financially. Even if Columbus was willing to eat half of the 2 years remaining on Laine's contract, that's still $4.35 million. Well, the Wild are basically a league minimum player away from the cap ceiling right now,
Hmm.
and even if you got them to take Freddie Gaudreau, the money doesn't work. A lot of people have said, well, what about Philip Gustafson? Yeah, that then the money works, but I don't see how Columbus makes a Philip Gustafson trade with Merzlikins still on the books for 3 more years at $5.4 million. So even if the Wild were willing to take on Merzlikins for Gustafson, the money wouldn't work there. So it just, to me, I think it's going to be very, very difficult, especially in light of the fact that there's a lot of teams with significant cap space that probably could take on Line A at a bigger freight than Columbus having to eat half his $8.7 million. So that's going to be interesting to hear about. I really do think that if the Wild do want to get rid of Freddie Gaudreau, that Columbus is a team that they'll at least have a conversation with to see if there's any chance that Dean Evison would want him back, and if Don Waddell would want to do that. And that obviously would free up a significant roster spot in 4 years, of Freddie Gaudreau. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on, whether that has something to do with lining or not. But in terms of back to your original question, I'm just happy for Dean. I think it's absurd that with the number of coaching jobs that were available this offseason that it took this long. I think the fact that he wasn't hired anywhere else is going to be the benefit for the Blue Jackets, because I think that you and I both agree that this guy could coach. They're an
Yes.
up and coming team with a lot of young players. And it's just going to be really fascinating to see what he's able to do there, and I think it's well earned, well deserved, and I just love the fact that Dean Evison bet on himself. He turned down a couple that we know of, assistant/associate coaching jobs this offseason from teams that didn't hire him as a head coach, because he said, you know what, no, I'm a head coach. I'll just wait until next year. I'll try to be first out of the gate next year. And what happens? Columbus fires Pascal Vincent and hires Dean Evison. So he bet on himself, and it turned out being a great, great move for him.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good fit. I'm not sure Wild fans understand the risk involved with Patrick Laine. We all play fantasy
Yeah,
sports, and you look at the stats, and we've seen him in Winnipeg, and he had a really nice run there. I got to be honest with you, Mike. I'm
yeah.
not certain that's a good fit right here, right now with this team.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Other than it would get Marcus Johansson off the second line, so that would be good. But I agree with you. I'm not the biggest fan. He obviously can score goals, but he's had a lot of baggage the last couple of years. Obviously, he's coming out of the player assistant program. He lost his dad a couple of years ago. I really think that has affected him greatly. I know how close that he was with his father. But the guy can score. What I don't love about him is he gives this vibe sometimes of being a lazy player, not a lot of pace to his game. And the other thing that always concerns me about Line, which I think is actually an admirable trait, is he is so self-deprecating. Like, there are times when he is not playing well that you interview him and you almost want to put your hand on his shoulder and be like, dude, it's not this bad. Like, calm down. Don't beat yourself up. You know what I mean? Like, there's just something about him. And I actually like that, because one thing that always drives me crazy about professional athletes, but it's the reason why they got to where they are, is that sometimes they just don't think they're, what stinks. They are almost shocked at when they're getting criticism and critiqued and all that stuff, and sometimes you're amazed at like when they're in a huge slump that they still like, I've been playing great, and Patrick Laine is sort of the opposite of that. So the only thing I could tell you from doing a lot of due diligence and reporting is that the Wild like him. Bill Guerin, if he could make it work, would try to make it work. That is just something that has just been extremely clear for me from weeks of
Hmm.
reporting from the background.
And let's get back to Marco Rossi, because, I know it wasn't picture perfect, but I thought he had a pretty damn good year
Yeah,
last year. And it sure feels like the Wild are somewhat disappointed. And I don't quite see it, because I still
yeah.
think there's some more upside there, Mike.
Yeah, I don't know if disappointed is the right word, even though that's very clearly what is being portrayed. Just the fact that they're willing to at least have conversations with other team about him. I think it's more where they just see him in the future, and I just think that with Riley Heidt coming, with Urov coming, with the desire to obviously re-sign Kaprizov to a huge deal, the fact that they just signed Boldy to a 7-year deal, the fact that Eriksson Ek is there. They see Urov as a center. They see Riley Heidt as a center, and they see them as top six. They see both of them as top six centers. They just don't know where the fit would be in the future for Rossi. because in their eyes he'd be penciled in for a third line type role, but they got Eriksson Ek there, height, and again Urov there, and so they're trying to make all the pieces work. What made no sense to me is why they were at least exploring conversations now with other teams, because you still got him at an unbelievable price next year at $863,000. Urov isn't coming. Height is 19 years old and might not make the team, and even if he does, you can send him back to junior. It just seemed like there was no reason to make this decision now. And we both know that as long as this organization has existed, other than Mikko Koivu and Joel Eriksson Ek, this team has long craved for drafting and developing young quality centers. And here's a guy that did everything the Wild wanted from him last year by staying here, putting on muscle, getting faster, working with Andy Ness, working with Matt Harder. Harder went out to visit him this offseason. He's coming back here again in August early before going to the Olympic qualifier for Austria. He's done everything. And then he comes out, he scores 20-plus goals. Why move him now? Let's give him another chance. If he has a huge year, then maybe you sign him to a bridge deal next year, and it buys you more time for some of these young kids. But the one thing that I think is extremely clear is that the Wild right now are not willing to invest in him the type of term that they were willing to give Eriksson Ek, that they gave Brock Faber, that they gave Matt Boldy. They've had no conversations, at least as of now, with his agent on a new deal, an extension. And even next summer, I just would be shocked if we see him get a 7 or 8 year deal. If anything, I think it would be sort of a short-term 3-year type deal that, say, a Marchenko just got in Columbus in the 3.5 range. It just feels like the Wild right now are not convinced that he's a huge part of their long-term future.
What are your thoughts on Yakov Trenin and that being one of the key players that Bill Guerin added in this offseason? How well will he fit in your eyes?
Well, I mean, I like what he is as a player. I just don't know. I still don't love the fact that they invested this type of money and this type of contract into another third line guy. And it just felt like this is why they signed Marcus Foligno. This is why they signed Ryan Hartman to those deals. And here, because maybe it didn't work last year, largely because of injuries, and in the case of Ryan Hartman, in at least Bill Guerin's mind, underperformance, they go out and they commit this money to Trenin. I just think that it's a spot for 4 years that's going to potentially block out another player, and that's significant money for a team that's still cap-strapped, that's going to be cap-strapped even next summer, when all of us expected that they were going to go out and spend a ton of money because of the Suter and Parise deals, sort of mostly coming off the books. It's still going to be there for another 3 or 4 years after that. But it just, I don't know. I just don't love it. But he's a good player. He should help their penalty kill. He's physical. He works his butt off, and he's a heck of a quote, which is always good for you and me. And so we'll see. I just I'm gonna have to see him more, and how he fits. But I don't know. It caught me off guard because all offseason the Wild were talking about signing, say, a David Perron type player on a 1 or 2 year deal to buy time for some of their young kids that were coming. And now they go out and they change it up to get back to their, quote, hard-nosed identity. And but that's what Foligno should have done. That's what Goudreau should have done. That's what Hartman should have done. That's why they signed those guys. And now, you have Ogren here. You have Huzantinov here. It just, I don't know. It just felt like a weird contract to invest in my eyes. That's just my opinion. I know that other people disagree with me. Obviously, people inside the organization. LaPanta's not exactly on board with my opinion on this one either.
And I guess we have to let it play out because
yes,
there are other moves to be made, and I'm feeling like it is a little crowded at that third line spot, and I don't like Johansson on the second line as much as you don't. But there are other moves that can, we don't know who Ogren is yet. I sure feel like at some point he needs to be a top 6 guy. I'm not sure he's ready for that yet, but that would change the order of the dominoes as they fall. I think the one thing we can all agree on, Mikey. And I talk about you, me, LaPanta, most all of us that cover the team, fans alike. The Brock Faber deal was a no-brainer. And I think in the years to come, we're going to look back at this and say this is a pretty damn good value. Right now, I know it's a lot of money, but if this is the player he's going to be, then with where the the cap is going, this could be very, very good for Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean the cap. That is the one thing. As long as we don't have a freaking another global pandemic, which, by the way, if we do, I would think that we would all that the world would act a little differently,
Right.
and not shut everything down, which would then not create such a huge business problem in the NHL. And the only reason why the cap was stagnant the last several years, is that the players essentially had to owe back money to the owners that fronted essentially the league at that point, for lack of a better explanation, I should say. As you know, I'm not a business guy, but essentially that's why the cap didn't rise. Now that the owners are recouped their money, the cap is going to continually go up here for several years. So in several years, by 2023, first of all, when Faber's deal is up, I mean that $8.5 million is not going to be, it's not going to be, say, what the percentage of the cap ceiling is now, but the way that it is going for young defensemen in this league right now on their next contracts is it's just a skyrocketed position right now. Owen Power and Jake Sanderson and Charlie McAvoy. I mean, it's just over and over again we're seeing guys get 8.5, 9.5 at the age that Brock Faber is at. So if you can get him with the cap rising at 8.5 and assume that he's just going to continue to grow and grow and grow and grow, or even just be the player that he is. That is a really quality position. He is their future captain in my eyes. He's their future number one right D in my eyes, and that's what you pay a number one defenseman, and they believe that he is that guy. So if he did have a huge year this year, if he even was steady on his offense this year, next summer he could be a $9.5 million defenseman. So the Wild were taking a bet that he is just going to continue to get better and that this deal is going to be a steal in 2 or 3 years. And so this is the type of deal that you should extend out early. Other ones like Middleton and some of the others, I think that it probably behooves you to wait a little bit. And like here's a good example: is Middleton got a 3-year extension at 4.35. If he had a great year this year, would he really be more than 4.35 next year? I really don't think so, especially in light of guys like Brendan Dillon and Sean Walker getting less money. So, I think that's the one that they could have waited on. Maybe a Hartman, same thing. But Brock Faber at 21 years old, it is worth the bet in my eyes.
I'm with you on that. And I look at these Stanley Cup teams that win, and I go back to when the Penguins had their run. They had Crosby and Malkin, and the Blackhawks did it. And at the core of their offensive front was Taves and Kane. You look at Edmonton now. You mentioned Draisaitl still there for another year, but he and McDavid. You look at the 1-2 punch that Barkov had on the front end with that supporting cast in Florida. Kachuk probably comes to mind as the 1A. Mm-hmm. Is Matt Boldy the 1A? Like, we know who the big dog is on the Minnesota Wild. It's Kirill Kaprizov, and it's not close. But every superstar needs that 1A, that guy to go with them, to draw attention to another line, to open up some things for that top player in certain matchups. Is Matt Boldy developing into that guy? Is he going to be that guy?
I think so. I mean, he's got 60 goals in the last 2 years at age 22 and 23. Not a lot of guys do that, and I think he's just going to continue to excel and get much, much better. I mean, that's the one thing about his game. He had, almost 70 points last year. I think he finished with 69. He didn't hit the 30-goal mark, but he finished with 29. And remember, he had a really, really tough start to the season where he, sprained his AC joint and probably came back too early, couldn't score, and then finally does once John Hines took over, then went on a tear. And I just think that if he continues to evolve his game, get to the grittier areas, I think that he has the ability to be a true 40 or 50 goal scorer in this game. He could skate. He's got unbelievable hands in tight spaces. Just a great shot. I really do think he's got that ability, but he's going to have to get to the harder areas. Now, John Hines coached the World Championship team. Bill Guerin was on the management team of the World Championships. He wasn't the GM. That was Brent Peterson down in Florida was technically the GM. But I'll be honest, I didn't watch the World Championships, but all reports from Bill Guerin and John Hines is that Matt Boldy was one of their best players. And the other thing they did last year is they put him on the penalty kill. Or last in the tournament is they put him on the penalty kill, and apparently he did really well. So that's one thing that we'll have to watch in training camp this year is Matt Boldy is going to get PK time this year. And some of the great teams in this league, we see it in Florida with Sam Reinhart, obviously Barkov. We see it in New York with Kreider and Zibanejad. Great teams have superstars on the penalty kill. The Wild really rarely have ever done that, other than maybe Parise. And I think a lot of people would debate whether he was a true superstar. And so I think it's time that we see a Matt Boldy in that spot. And, if all of a sudden he gets 2 or 3 or 4 shorthanded goals, now that gives him more ability to really elevate his offensive numbers. So, and then they got Urov coming, who I really genuinely believe he has a chance to be a star. Obviously, next summer they'll be able to re-sign or extend out Kirill Kaprizov if he's willing to do so. So now all of a sudden we're starting to see, real quality, skilled, studly stars in this lineup. And if Boldy and Kaprizov could be a 1-2 punch, and then Urov comes here and adds to that, the future looks bright.
Well, let's talk about Kaprizov because you and I both know his good buddy Kulikov just won a cup with the Florida Panthers. And when Cooley was here with Minnesota, those two guys were inseparable. And it's kind of like brotherly love, right? So now his buddy's got that Stanley Cup. And watching Kaprizov like we do on a daily basis, we know personally how driven this guy is and how that is the ultimate goal. Do you believe, as the Wild continue to make these moves, as Boldy develops, Faber's locked in, do you believe in your where you're sitting right now that he's going to lock it up here long term, and at some point he'll have a chance to lead this team to a cup in Minnesota?
Well, I mean, I'll just be honest. I'm nervous because the Wild are nervous. I mean, I could tell you the Wild are nervous and not exactly convinced. Like they do have to show him that they have a long future of winning, and it doesn't just have to be this year. It's not like if the Wild miss the playoffs this year that all hope is lost. But this guy wants to win. I mean, he's won championships in the KHL. He won an Olympic gold. He is a winner. You see it. And if you're not going to show him that there's a long-term plan here to be a perennial winner, I think he leaves because I just think that he's got no reason to stay. There's really trust me, he loves it in Minnesota. I know that to be true. But there's nothing keeping him here. He's got tons. There's 31 other great teams in the NHL and great markets in the NHL. He's got friends everywhere. He's got, as you sort of alluded, not that Kulikov is going to have a long future in Florida, but even though he just re-signed, but he's got people that are always in his ear, like come here, come here, come here. There's tons of teams that are cap space, Chicago. There's a lot of teams that are going to be interested in this guy, and then in this league. We just saw it at free agency. You always got to worry about tampering. So I think it is incumbent on the Wild to continue to treat him like the star he is, give him lots of information, have conversations with him, assure him you don't have to wait till next year at July 1. It needs to be a constant communication all year to let him know how important he is. Because it's never gone well with the Wild and Paul Theofanis. It just has not been an easy negotiation on any of his contracts. And so that's the other thing. Now, the one good thing that happened is Paul Theofanis now has a collaboration with the guys from CAA, with Pat Brisson and JP Barry. And so when it is time for the Wild to start negotiating with Kaprizov, there also could be conversations with those agents, and those guys are deal makers, and they know the markets for true superstars. They've got $1 billion plus of long-term contracts in the NHL, maybe even well more than that. They've got everybody they've got but they've got superstar after superstar after superstar. So I actually think that is a huge help that Bill Guerin will probably be able to at least have conversations with other agents besides Paul Theofanis. But until that deal is done next summer, if it is not, it is going to be really jittery here in Minnesota with the fans, with the organization, everything.
Yeah, I would argue he's as popular an athlete in this town as anybody on any team. And I'm including Ant. I'm including JJ. This guy is electric, and he brings people to the building. And I think that has got to be the number one priority. And selfishly, I just got to tell you from a fan's perspective, and we all still love the game. We all still love the team. it's a different experience when he plays. Like it's a
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
enjoyment level for me when 97's in the lineup. When he's hurt, it's just not, doesn't have the same feel to it. You're listening to Wooden Sticks with Kevin Gorg. I've got Michael Russo on from The Athletic. We've got a few minutes left, and then we'll put him on the hot seat at the very end with some great questions to see if we can test his knowledge of some of the best that the NHL has to offer.
All
Mikey,
right.
looking at the bounce back factor on this roster, if you had to look at Gustafson, Foligno, Hartman, Spurgeon, and Freddie Gaudreau. And some are in there because they had injuries. Some are in there like Gustafson because they had a year that most considered to be subpar. If you had to, in like horse race like fashion, bet which one would have the biggest bounce back year from those five guys, who would your money be on?
Well, I'll just say who it better be, and that's Gustafson. Because if it's not Gustafson, this is going to be a long year. I mean, they cannot have the goaltending that they had from him last year. It's got to get better. I know the Wild. I mean, I'm going to be really fascinated, by the way, on how they handle the goaltending because they want Volstead on this team. And are there going to be times where they could even afford to have three goalies here? Does it make sense to have three goalies here? There's still a motivation inside the organization that if they can move Gus and have a tandem of Volstead and Fleury, they'd like to do that. So that'll be one thing. So it's got to be Gus. And I think that he learned his lesson last year. He wasn't in the greatest shape at times. I don't think he was in terrible shape, but I think that he probably went back home this offseason and got humbled a bit. Probably got a little, you get the big payday, and I don't think he handled it very, very well. And we'll see if he does better. The other thing that's going to help is just Jared Spurgeon being back in the lineup. I mean, I think we all just take for granted of what that, because Faber also got such an opportunity last year with Spurgeon out, what that, that we sort of take for granted of what his loss meant. But without Spurgeon last year, it was a chore. They were always bouncing around guys, and so if you can get Brodin and Faber together with then Middleton reunited with Spurgeon, I think that's going to be incredible. And so I do think they bounce back. I mean, Vegas odds are usually pretty good, and the Vegas right now has the Wild as a 60% chance of making the playoffs and a playoff team. So I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that they can if they could get better goaltending.
When I think, the one thing you LaPanta and myself, we don't always agree on a lot, but the goaltending numbers last year, he had that chart at the end of the year when Minnesota got league average goaltending.
Yeah.
Their win percentage was through the roof, and that's all we're looking for. Gustafson doesn't need to go out there and stop 95% of the shots, but he needs to be at a consistent level that the team can rely on. And so that, to me, I was a little surprised. I think we all kind of thought in the back of our mind, what is Bill Guerin going to do specifically when it comes down to the offseason over at the draft? Is he going to make that move? Because I know everybody's itching to see Volstead in that net and have him learn from Marc-Andre Fleury for one more year. So I do find that dynamic super interesting into training camp, and I still wouldn't close the door, right? That Bill Guerin, he still might be able to make a move here.
Yeah, it's going to be hard because it just feels like everybody that needed a goaltender got a goaltender, and that's why I was always concerned that they were going to be able to even move him. And again, I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing they haven't moved him because I think it's a good bet at his age to just expect to bounce back. If you have Volstead at 21 years old with Fleury at 39, that's actually, to me, a bigger concern because who's playing half the games? Who's playing 60 games of that too? It's definitely not Flower. And I don't think it would be a smart move to have Volstead just get 60, 65 games at his age. It could be a tough chore to ask of this kid. So I think it's not the worst thing in the world that Gus is back. And then if he could resurrect his career, now you have a trade trip at some point. Because, we still know that Volstead is going to be, we assume, the goalie of the future. And so, if you could get this guy to, that was the problem, is that they were trading low off summer. So it just wasn't an appealing name to a lot of teams that needed goaltenders. And so, I think that this is a good thing that actually, if he's back in the lineup. But you're right. I mean, if Billy could still get it done, I could see him getting it done.
Okay, take the goaltenders out of the equation. Let's fast forward to a few weeks from now when we gather for training camp in St. Paul. Which young player are you most excited to watch, maybe that has the most impact on this year's roster in training camp that maybe wasn't a part of the team more than maybe just a couple of games last year?
I mean, Ogren is still the one that I'm super excited about. I just think this guy is a professional. First of all, his dad's a trainer, so he's already got an NHL body. And just I know we only saw him 3 games or whatever it was, but to me, like he that was a good glimpse of what he can be. I know he didn't play the greatest teams in the world, right? He played in well, he had the tough game against Vegas, and then he played in San Jose and all that. But to me, like that game in San Jose just showed me how good this kid can be, and so I really want to see him get a really quality opportunity this year. And the other thing is I want to see if Rossi could replicate what he did last year, if not more.
Yeah, and I think Ogren, to your point, if he develops just a little bit from last year, from what we saw to where he could be this year, he can be that second line guy. I still
Yeah,
think Johansson's got skill, but I think if you get him matchups on a third or fourth line, he's going to be a far more effective player because at his age, playing less minutes with that skill set gives him the chance to do some things. And now you got a guy like Ogren that's hungry on that second line. I still think long term, that's the best case scenario for this roster
absolutely.
as they start the season.
Absolutely, and it will be interesting how John Hines deploys it because obviously he's always going to have Marcus Johansson in his back pocket. I know he does respect Marcus Johansson as a player, but he is what he is. He's a 40-point guy that's going to always leave you wanting more, and so Ogren's the future. I'd love to see him get. It doesn't need to necessarily start right at the beginning of the season. You could slow play him up the lineup, but eventually I'd love to see him get that opportunity on that second line, and so. It's going to be really fascinating to watch how John Hines handles training camp because he's given a lot of indications that we could see a reunion to start training camp of Hartman, Zuccarello, and obviously Kaprizov, and then a second line with Boldy and Eriksson Ek. So does he throw Johansson there because Johansson, that line, as we know in the second half 2 years ago, was unbelievable? Or does he start off with an Ogren there? Does he give a Foligno an opportunity there? Does he try Goudreau there? I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see how he handles camp. The one thing that he has made it extremely clear is, unlike a lot of coaches, he's not coming into camp with set lines in his head and he's just going to play them and play them and play them in camp. There's going to be a lot of experimentation. So every now and then, those people that love when I tweet out lines, they're going to freak out that day that I tweet out that Marcus Johansson's here and this guy's here and this guy's here. But that's the key to training camp. That's the good part of having a almost 3-week camp is that you get to experiment with a lot of different things. But the one thing that I will
Okay,
say is I like the fact that he's considering reuniting Zuccarello and Kaprizov because
me
Zuccarello,
too.
without Kaprizov last year, especially at even strength, became a total non-factor. That clearly they have impeccable chemistry, and they've got to figure out a way to get Zuccarello back to being a productive player.
I'm with you. He's a completely different player. I just think the enjoyment level of the game for him changes when he's out there with Kirill. They play off each other so well, and you've got to get back to that chemistry, and that'll loosen some things up in the middle part of the roster. My final wild question, and then we'll get to the hat trick hot seat. Your initial thoughts with the addition of assistant coach Jack Capuano?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't chatted with him yet. Obviously, I've interviewed him in the past. I like him. I mean, he is he's a Northeast guy, so they add him to the mix of a bunch of Northeast guys in this organization. Obviously, highlighted by Bill Guerin and John Hines. But Capuano, what I like about him is he's got head coaching experience. So, the one thing that John Hines is going to need is somebody to really, to challenge him, to, throw different ideas about. That's one thing that I think Bill Guerin really wants is sort of a bigger personality on the bench. And that's what Jack brings. I mean, obviously he is going to be their sort of their, top, I would say assistant coach there. Note, with all due respect, obviously, to the other guys, Pat Dwyer and some of the other guys that are part of the mix here. But I just think that Jack was a good hire. It was very clear that the Wild, after they they had nothing against. You and I both love Darby Hendrickson. It was
Yes,
nothing
for
against
sure.
Darby. It just felt like it was time. Let him go on. He goes down there, and so it'll be just really fascinating to see how everything works now with the whole group. I mean, they got Jason King, who's still going to be in a position where he's going to run the power play, but Jack Capuano has coached the penalty kill before. And I think that with Patrick Dwyer's help, that's going to really help things. And obviously, they got Freddie Shabbat back as the goalie coach.
Yeah, it should be fun once we get to training camp to see all the new responsibilities lay out, especially during practice time. It's a good coaching staff. I'm happy for Darby. We all love Darby, and he and Bruno, I think, are going to have a great opportunity in Nashville. So I think all boats will rise. It'll all work out. Now we close here, Mikey, with the hat trick hot seat. There's no wrong answer. It's just kind of figuring out who you are, and I think I might have a pretty good idea on a couple of these, but I'm curious, and I think the listeners will be too. We'll start with number one all time, and you've covered a bunch in the many, many years you've been on the beat for the National Hockey League. Who is your most favorite player that you ever covered?
God, that is so hard.
I
As a
know.
as a guy to deal with or a player,
Either
like
way, I mean, whatever comes to
um.
the top of your head, that like
I mean,
this is the
the
guy I would
best player,
pick.
that I have ever covered is Pavel Bure, Hall of Famer,
Wow.
Russian Rocket. I mean, he was just incredible to watch. In terms of probably my favorite all-time player that I covered in Florida, there were so many that I absolutely loved. But Roberto Luongo was a joy to cover. The guy was hilarious. Here in Minnesota, I mean, Brian Ralston comes to mind. Marcus Foligno comes to mind. Mark Parrish. I got the luxury of covering Parrish both in Florida and Minnesota. Love him. I mean, there's just so many. I mean, as you know, Gordy, I'm bad at these questions because I've got a list of thousand. The best part of covering the NHL is getting to deal with these players. I mean, just even Jake Middleton. We haven't known him a long time, but is there any greater guy to deal with than that guy?
No, he's
It's just
tremendous.
yeah. I mean, it's Marc Andre Fleury. I mean, my God, at the end of our careers, we're going to be so honored that we got to cover this guy. Especially when he gets that Hall of Fame invite. Even Eric Stahl, I texted with him yesterday. It was incredible covering him. I know that obviously there are some people that don't think highly of him anymore because of the whole Pride jersey thing. But all I can tell you is, from my standpoint, he was just. It was an honor to cover him. He's just an incredible
Just a
dude
true
and a great player.
professional,
Yeah.
awesome guy. I'm with you.
Yep.
And I think the funny thing is when you cover the NHL is there are so few bad guys. And so that makes it
Hmm.
even more tricky to try to
Exactly.
pick out the best because
Yep.
most of these guys are just
Yep.
tremendous to work with. Like next
Yep.
week, I'm going to have Alex Stalock on this show.
Hmm.
And,
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
he's a guy you don't think of right away, but when you think about him, you smile because he's just a gem of a human being.
Yeah, yeah. Nick Schultz, Jared Spurgeon. I mean, the
Yes.
list is endless. This is going to be my 20th year covering the Wild next season. And you and I could count on one hand maybe the guys that we didn't love covering. Same thing in Florida. I covered 10 years. I can't think of one guy in Florida right now off the top of my head that I didn't just enjoy covering. I mean, it was just, it's the best part of covering this sport.
No
There's
question.
no doubt about it.
All right, so you've got an off night with no job responsibilities. You're not trying to get caught up. You're not writing another story. You've got a full free night in an NHL city, and you can only pick one. Tell us the city and tell us why.
Vegas. I mean, I just love Vegas, and the reason why in Vegas is because there's whatever you want to do on that off night, you could do.
Yep.
If you're in the mood to go shoot craps, you could go do that. If you're in the mood to go to smoke a cigar, there's countless cigar bars. If you're in the mood to go to a show, the best entertainment in the world is there. If you're in the mood for having an elite dinner, the best restaurants in the world are there. So to me, it's sort of the adult playground that I just absolutely love.
That's the one question I thought I knew the answer, and you came through 100% with what I thought you would say. Final one, and we know now that you're a part of the Trampled by Turtles show. You're in, you're out, you're there at multiple concerts. But I want to go back to younger, maybe little Michael Russo. The first concert you ever attended, I want to know who you went to see, and I want to know the venue. And I'm guessing it wasn't Trampled by Turtles.
God, yeah, no. I'm embarrassed to say it.
No.
I'm pretty positive that my first concert was Peter, Paul, and Mary at the Sunrise Music Theater.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, I'm pretty positive. The other band that just popped in my head that I saw there was Toad the Wet Sprocket with Rusted Root opening. I've seen Counting Crows 1,000 times though. Counting Crows, Hootie and the Blowfish, REM. Those were the concerts that I would every time they came to South Florida I would go see. That would probably be the biggest ones. Seen Billy Joel before. But yeah, Peter, I'm almost positive. The only reason why I'm thinking Peter, Paul, and Mary is I just remember being so young that my mom had to bring me. And
Yep.
so yep, I remember going with some friends, and when you're a young kid and you go to summer camp like I used to every single summer. Peter, Paul, and Mary songs are always big things at summer camp. So like when they came down to South Florida, I went with me, my mom, probably my stepdad, and probably a bunch of like camp friends of mine.
That's awesome. All right. So before we close, what can fans expect if they join you in person on the 14th for the worst seats in the house with our guy Anthony LaPanta?
Yeah, probably us bickering over something. We're gonna get to meet. I'm gonna get to meet this incredible news producer on here, Alex. Get
Yes.
to meet our also Davida, who's another great producer that we have here at Talk North. Probably a lot of people from our Portugal trip because it'll be a first live show since Portugal. So I'm hoping that we have a bit of a reunion of those people. But the one thing I'll tell you about Split Rocks is we get, it's always interesting because we go to all the Tuttle's restaurants, whether it's Tuttle's in Hopkins, Elsie's in Northeast Minneapolis, and then Split Rocks up in Wyoming. And so we always kind of get different crowds, sort of like obviously the North Metro people are probably more likely to go to Split Rocks. And the one thing I'll tell you about this place is it's gotten so big when we go to Split Rocks that we no longer do it in the restaurant there. We do it in an actual ballroom there. So it's super comfortable. Everybody's got ballroom type tables. We have our own devoted staff from Split Rocks that wait the tables, and so it's
Wow.
just a really fun venue to do it. And then after you're done at our podcast, you can go bowl, you could go throw darts, you could have play arcades. I mean, it's a definite fun place, Split Rocks.
I appreciate it, Mike. That's awesome. Good update there. And I really enjoyed our conversation. It gets me excited to get back on the beat, to
Yeah,
get back to training camp. And it gets you to start to think about the hockey season, which is really about a month away. Hard to believe we're a month
yeah.
away from seeing each other every single day.
Yeah, well, Gorg, you know how I know that we're getting close? I leave for Prague in 16 days for the NHL media
Oh,
tour there.
wow.
So like, and that's a fun thing that I'm the only North American writer that goes overseas for these things, and I get exclusive access to usually one European star per team. Sit down with them for 15 minutes. Last year it was guys like Barkov and Nylander, and this year it's going to be more stars. And then September 10th to the 12th, I'll be in Vegas for the NHL Media Tour North American version, which is unbelievable. That is a true star from every team. Matt Boldy will be representing the Wild this year. Sorry, not Matt Boldy. Brock Faber will be. Matt
Oh,
Boldy was
sweet.
last year. Yeah, Matt Boldy was last year. So that'll be really cool. Usually it's like guys like Eichel and McDavid and Draisaitl. It's really sweet, and I know we're getting close too because Chad Abbott's already sent me my state fair dates that I'm going to be on the radio. So
Yeah,
we're
State Fair
getting
is
we're
right
getting
around the corner,
yeah,
which tells me summer's coming to an end, and that makes me a
yep,
little bit sad.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you. It's I don't know. It's kind of like going back to school. Like as excited as I get for training camp, like every time it turns August 1st, I get that feeling of
Queasy
dread too.
feeling, yes.
Yeah, it is. It's like going back to school where it's like you're sort of excited, but you're like, God, I cannot believe that my next 8 months are going to be. So
Thanks for being
anyway,
a part of the show today, Mike. Look forward to seeing you real soon at training camp, and maybe you'll even swing out to Canterbury and see us at the racetrack.
yeah, anytime, Gorgie.
I appreciate it. Michael Russo here on Wooden Sticks. I'll be back after this quick break. We'll put a wrap on this show and preview what's to come next week here on the Wooden Sticks radio show. Welcome back to Wooden Sticks. We are broadcasting from the Aquarius Home Services studio as advertised. My good friend Mikey Russo from The Athletic just hammered it today, just crushed it. Some great information, some great opinions as always, and he's so tapped into the goings on throughout the league, but more specifically the pulse of the Minnesota Wild and what fans need to be looking for with training camp just around the corner. And it was fun to hear Mike's opinion on Dean Evison because for guys like Russo, myself, Anthony LaPanta, and all the folks that cover this team on a daily basis, we love John Hines. John Hines has been great to work with, and I think he's a really, really good coach. But you miss the friendships you have. And all that being said, I'm going to miss Dean Evison. I'm going to miss Darby Hendrickson. It's a new world. That's how it works in the National Hockey League. The deck gets shuffled. you want your good friends and good people to land on their feet. And to no one's surprise, Darby's got a great spot with Andrew Burnett in Nashville, and Dean Evison, I think, is going to do really good work over with the Columbus Blue Jackets. And yes, it ties into where the Wild are going, because we love Freddie Gaudreau here, but we know that relationship that Dean Evison and Freddie have, and how Dean's been always able to extract the very, very best from his game. So that is something that Wild fans should definitely keep an eye on. And then as we get going in training camp, we'll have updates on how this goaltending battle plays out. And I think Michael hit the nail on the head with the Gustafsson take, that if this team's going to be a playoff team and a bounce back team, which a lot of people on the national side believe they are, they're going to be a playoff team next year. I think it starts in between the pipes. And if Gustafsson gets off to a good start and shows the form he had 2 years ago, it doesn't need to be over the top. It doesn't need to be an all-star type of performance. What it needs to be is consistent. Less dips in the game, more of consistent play. Get that save percentage in that 91, 92 range on a regular basis so the team can depend on that, and then make big saves at big moments. The penalty kill being a big part of that. And yes, Jared Spurgeon being healthy is going to help a ton in situations on the defensive side, specifically when the Wild are down a man. And Brock Faber now being paired up with Jonas Brodin and Middleton being back with Jared Spurgeon puts our top four in a position to be one of the better core groups of defensemen in the National Hockey League. And so guys like Fleury and Gustafsson, and when he gets the chance, Volstead, are going to have a more stable situation in front of them. And hopefully they'll put their skill set out there and have a bounce back year to lead this team back into the playoffs. And I think, again, for Wild fans, a lot of young talent right now to keep an eye on, whether it's in Iowa, whether it's during training camp, whether it's at the college level with Zeev Boyum. I think Mike really kind of tapped into the excitement right now that this team has created, the buzz that this team can create moving forward because of where they've put themselves. So, yeah, are they a little landlocked in the middle of their roster with the middle six forwards right now? Sure. But you have to trust that Bill Guerin and his staff are going to make the requisite moves to open up some ice time for some of the young talent they've assembled. Because if you look at the last couple of drafts and you look at the prospect pool that this team has at their disposal right now, and I've been doing this job now for 19 years covering this hockey team, I would argue that the pool right now of young talent has never been better. So there's a lot right now for Wild fans to look forward to. And I know, if you read Michael Russo on a regular basis, he can be their harshest critic. And for some Wild fans, that rubs them the wrong way. But Mike's always been upfront. He's been honest, and he's a pro. And he doesn't put his heart in front of his head. But even Michael Russo, who shades to that side, who has to do his job for the Athletic and be that guy, you can sense, even in our conversation today, some of that positivity, which should make you feel good about where these things are going. So next week, it's Alex Stalock. You want positivity. You want a fun-loving guy, one of my very favorites that I ever covered. He's that guy. South St. Paul, UMD. He was going to be our guest this week, but we had a couple of scheduling snafus, and Russo was nice enough to slide in and take care of that. So really looking forward to talking to my guy Al next week here on the show. And thank you again for your consistent listening-ship of, is that even a word, listening-ship? Just thanks for being a part of the show as hockey fans and tuning in here on the Talk North Network. I'm Kevin Gorg. This is Wooden Sticks. We'll talk to you next week with Al Stalock.